the magic that is Tanya, and I do want to remark on that. As everyone here knows, Tanya is an urban planner and the author of another remarkable book along with Mark here called Wake Up Joburg. And tonight we have, in conversation with Sarah Charlton, who's a professor at the Wits School of Planning and Architecture. I also have in the audience two very special people. Michael Tynestad, who edited the work, and Solomon, who's meant to be here, who's ill, who's walked with Tanya for 15 years on the streets of Jeppy in making this book. So I would have loved to welcome Solomon to the launch as well. But we're going to have a conversation for about 45 minutes or half an hour and then take questions. I mean, Sarah, it's up to you. But it's up to Sarah to run the evening now.
Okay, great. You're using one mic.
Good evening, everybody. It's really great to see so many people here, but I'm also not surprised, given Tanya's track record of writing absolutely wonderful books. So it's really with much pleasure that I'm here in conversation with Tanya, and I'm deeply grateful for the invitation, but also for the opportunity and the nudge to read the book cover to cover before this evening's event. And it has been an absolutely wonderful read, it really has. So it's educative, it's a thought-provoking book, but it's also just thoroughly enjoyable. It's a bit of a page-turner. And although it's in my discipline, my field of sort of urban planning, it's way beyond that. And so those of you that are going to read the book, and I hope you all do, I think you're in for a treat, I really do. So I have 5 or 6 questions for Tanya. And then I think we're going to open it up to see if anyone else in the room would like to ask some questions or make some comments. So here we are, I'm kicking you off. Okay, so this book focuses on a particular part of the inner city of Johannesburg, which is known amongst other names as Jeppy. And in the inside cover of the book, there is very usefully a map that tells us which bit of the inner city the book focuses on. And there's some beautiful drawings and maps in the book, so that's also part of it. So it pinpoints the area of Jeppy that the book is all about. But I think it's important for those of us that aren't particularly familiar with that part of the inner city to get a bit of a feel for what it's all about, what it's like, what its character is. And so I'm going to read a couple of lines from the book and then ask Tanya to say something about that. So it says, the physical space Jeppy occupies spreads over several city blocks that abut Park Station, the city central railway station. Almost every building hosts many micro shops. Each secret shopping centre is a hybrid place. It's not quite a shopping mall, not quite covered souk, and not conventional street trading. It is a booming enterprise in goods and property that is at the front and centre of city transformation in Johannesburg. So Tanya talks in the early part of the book about these micro shops, these small trading spaces. And one of the early chapters in the book is called How to Unfold a 1 square metre shop. So, Tanya, tell us about these extremely small shops and what is significant about them.
So, also thank you everybody for coming, and thank you Sarah. We've been friends and colleagues for many years, and it's a privilege to have you here. So the area called Jeppy, which is not the Jeppy that most of us know as Jeppy's Town, but it's called Jeppy because of the naming of that street, the original naming of the street, which is now Iwambisa Street. And it's interesting for me that people who trade there and shoppers who come there call it Jeppy, after an object of movement, because it's all about movement. It's all about moving goods and moving people. And the space was the Harley Street of Johannesburg. It was medical buildings that we would have known from the 70s and 60s and 80s. And that space that became redundant buildings and had been appropriated as these incredible secret shopping centres. Not so secret anymore, they've now been there for 20, 30 years. But it's a space where what was office space has been carved up into tiny shops, into cupboard-sized shops. And they are traded by thousands of entrepreneurs selling goods to tens of thousands of people, both local and people who come across the border on a daily basis, every day. People are coming across the border to shop here, from Zambia, from Zimbabwe, from Mozambique, from Botswana, from Malawi, from elsewhere. And this is turning over a massive trade. But the spaces are exquisite because when I first discovered this area, I thought, how are so many shops selling the same stuff to people and making a business? And couldn't make sense of just the spaces. And there were these tiny 1 square meter shops. And I spent a day, which we'll read about in the book, I spent many days in these shops. And I spent a day just counting how many goods this person could fit into this little 1 square meter shop. And it's an incredible array of cosmetics and socks and underpants and rat poison and nail clippers and a whole lot. And Berta has me helping her unpack the goods. And at one point she says, this is skin lightening cream, but it's China. Doesn't work. and then later on says, and this one is called rub, but hide it away because the police don't let us sell it. And there are these thousands of shops. When we later did studies, we counted 3,000 shops in a very small area of town. And also, apart from the sort of overwhelm of what the space was, when we did look at it spatially and architecturally with Thinesh Govender, with Urban Works, and some of those colleagues are here, we also understood that it's not an accidental architecture. It's a very deliberate architecture of how people are displaying goods, both to maximize the showing of those goods to shoppers, but also to be able to hide them. I think we'll talk about that soon.
So you're giving us a sense of this incredibly intense kind of shopping area. And at one point in the book, when you're describing it, you say, for a moment it seemed Joburg would burst with the effort to squeeze one more car, one more box, one more shopper into these city blocks. And you also talk about other things that are going on in the buildings, storage going on in upper levels, restaurants, coffee shops, but this incredible kind of vibrancy of trade, what you describe as retail in mind-bending quantities and conducted at an unconscionable speed. But you make the argument in the book that despite this busyness, this frenzy of activity, this franticness, that this area, which is known by other names to other people, Little Addis or the Ethiopian Quarter, there's even a shop, I think, which is called Addisburg, bringing to which is wonderful. You make the argument that this area is anything but chaotic, that the incredibly intense usage actually reflects a whole set of systems and organisation and multiple forms of organisation. And yet you have called the book the Chaos Precinct. But you say it's not chaos. So tell us about this title.
So I think it is chaos. It's also an invitation to look at chaos differently and to look at Johannesburg differently. But the background to the title is that I first came across this area in 2009 when I had the opportunity to work at the city, specifically in the JDA. And the JDA, one of its mandates was environmental upgrades in the inner city. And we were standing with sort of, the management team over a set of maps. I had just been told about these spaces and had been taken to see these extraordinary spaces. And I walked into these buildings which I recognized as, or were familiar to me as medical buildings many years ago, and walked into this overwhelm. And my instinct was there, something's happening in the city. It feels very big, but I don't know what the hell it is. And as a town planner, I do not have the beginning of the tools to understand what's going on. And so I felt sort of overwhelmed, humbled by it. But in probably a week later, we were standing in the JDA with the maps out, looking at deciding where we're going to put the next environmental upgrades. And I think some people in the room that day, I'm looking at you listening. And as the pens hover over, because the city puts its money where the private sector has already put its money, or where it wants to encourage the private sector to go. These are sensible reasons. And we've got the retail improvement district and the fashion district, and we're going to do an upgrade there. And as pens hovered over this particular area, which I've just been into, the manager of the union said, "We cannot invest there, it's a chaos precinct." And that phrase stuck with me. So through the book, and I was sort of nervous, should I use it or not, shouldn't I use it because it might be offensive? But I think it's really important to look into that chaos and what are the logics within that chaos. And that's what the 15 years from that moment until now has occupied me. And what are the logics? What are the ecosystems? What's the trade? Who are these? I had not to that time, before that time, met an Ethiopian person. And here there was Amharic in these buildings, and some of the buildings there's sort of English signage, and then there's Amharic signage. There are places in this building not for you. They're for Ethiopian speakers, for Ethiopian people, they're photographers, restaurants, etc., wedding dresses, clothing, spices. And so there was this whole city within a city unfolding, and I wanted to understand that, and then had the opportunity over the time to undertake some deep research in the space to try to understand the economy of the space. Different set of research to look at the architecture of the space, and that unfolded over the next few years. But then all the time I was also collecting stories. I was just talking to people to try to understand what was going on in the area.
So maybe we can pick up on all those different strands of work and activities that fed into this. So you spoke about working for the city or in the city in the Johannesburg Development Agency, and you spent a lot of time hanging out in the area, deep immersion, walking the streets. But as you say, you've also done commissioned research with colleagues, and I think there's some particularly significant pieces of research that maybe fed into this along the way. And then also the book with Mark, Wake Up, This is Joburg. So perhaps you could say something about some of that research, some of the specifics of it, and what it illuminated about the area.
So these thousands of traders in buildings are all paying rent, and there are some extraordinary levels of rent being paid. The rents have dropped, but around 2010, 2011, people were paying up to 5,000 rand a square metre. It is an unheard of rental in Johannesburg, but unheard of in the inner city, where it was difficult to get 120 rand a square metre, just by comparison. It's incredibly intensely traded. But the traders are under pressure. The traders are under pressure because of the enormous amount of policing in the area and the threats to their goods, to their livelihoods, because of the enormous amount of corrupt policing that goes on in the area. Obviously, they also have other risks and competitive risks and so on. But the building owners in the area were getting a lot of complaints from their tenants. We can't keep up with these rentals. We're paying so much money in police bribes, and our goods are being taken by police. And they're also under pressure. The buildings are under stress. There's no sort of getting away from it. They're not romanticizing the stress that these buildings are under. And of course, the city council was also, coming in, occasionally closing down buildings and so on. And the landlords were concerned about the need to understand this economy, to promote this economy, but they said at the back of every question was, how much money is in here? Is this a significant economy? Or is it just a sort of rat and mice economy? And so I was commissioned with Urban Works, with Progressives, and we did a big survey in the area. We had 70 question surveys. We interviewed 300 shopkeepers and 400 shoppers to try to understand each of their sort of backgrounds, why they were in the trade, how the trade worked, how information flowed in the area, how money flowed in the area, how much money was being spent in the area as well. And although we found out a lot about how 40% of people had gifted the police, 60% had, had violent incidents, there's a lot of data, it's all online, you can see it. The big number that stuck was that when we did the calculation from the amount shoppers were spending, only cross-border shoppers, this excludes South Africans in the area, but 70% of the shoppers are cross-border shoppers, and those people are spending, or were spending in 2017, so it's more now, 10 billion a year in that space. That is twice the annual turnover of Sandton City Shopping Centre. At that stage, the biggest mall in Africa. And suddenly, this is no place to be ignored, dismissed, or sort of attacked as being, illegal. It's a really important economy in an inner city that is not offering us a lot of hope. And here is an economy that is very significant, that we need to be looking at differently.
Astonishing figures and astonishing to get that sort of insight. Tanya, you mentioned the cross-border shoppers. I'm going to ask you something about that. One of the parts of the book that I particularly enjoyed was your account of shadowing what I would call a professional cross-border shopper. In this case, it was somebody who had come to Johannesburg from Malawi the day before in a bus to source client-specific orders. And so you accompany two shoppers for the day, and you report on it in the book in the form of a logbook, and it's just really fascinating. But I'm just going to read a very short extract. So this is at 09:21 a.m. in a men's suit store called Lovely and Vali Rossi, I don't know if I got that name right, on Troye Street. The shoppers took pictures of different suits in the shop. Zahira wanted a striped black suit, but did not find one. She photographed a black suit with fine spots. She immediately sent the picture to her client in Lilongwe via WhatsApp. The shop assistants also spoke Chichewa, and Zahira said she would buy a suit here for 500 Rand, sell it for 1,000 Rand in Malawi. Later, Zahira let us know that the person she was texting at the suit store had replied. He wanted to place the order. So you show us this highly personalized and people-intensive activity on the part of these kind of professional cross-border shoppers, but also that kind of level of personalization and human intensity of activity on the part of the suppliers. But you make the point that the nature of Johannesburg itself, that inner city part of Johannesburg, that really gritty part of Johannesburg, has an impact on how people have to operate in that space and their practices. So tell us about that.
So first of all, can I recognize Joseph Tembe, who walked that route with me and all the notes of the shoppers. Long before becoming a big lawyer in the city. So the shoppers, when you bring into Johannesburg 14,000 rand to spend to take home goods, you can't take a big risk. You can't just buy some of what's available. So people are coming. Many are bringing specific orders. Shocking pink handbag, spotty T-shirt, whatever. Very specific. And so they're spending their time doing a lot of comparative shopping. They're going, and the wonder of Jeppy is that there's so many shops that you can easily, in the morning, do a lot of comparative shopping. So they usually spend their first day just doing research. It's also because it's Johannesburg, you don't want to carry money. So when you carry that money, it's got to be very directed. You go into the shop, buy the goods, and pay for them. So you do that on your second day. First day is what we call window shopping. And people are walking around doing that. The other Johannesburg things is you've got to hide your money on your body, as we know. And then also the infrastructures that are set up for this are hotels and bus depots. And they do more than just transport people. They're also helping people with packaging. They'll also help people with porter services to go and collect the stuff. They'll keep the stuff safe. And so how people move around, we followed the same two shoppers into game. It was doing game. And then there was this conversation. I said, Joseph, listen what they're saying. And it had nothing to do with their shopping, with their particular shopping. The woman was handing over money to a sort of a neighbour's child, so a neighbour from Malawi, but a child who lives in South Africa. And they had this arrangement where he would buy, I have to read in the book to get the exact, but he would be buying furniture using his money here. She would get some money from him, pay some, she would then take some of that money back to Malawi. There was this whole other trade and money movement that was going on. But why game? Because game's a lot of security, it's very safe. Stand behind the fridges in game. You can do your transnational transactions.
Yeah.
And also the cross-border shoppers learn from each other. And they've got hours and hours on the bus. They're learning the trade, they're comparing where to go, where not to go, etc. And there are also, why do they come? Why isn't it just online shopping? And we interviewed people, some of the hotels are specifically Portuguese speaking or Chichewa or Zambian hotels. Many are mixed. But we went into, on Chaos Street, which used to be where you might remember Belém, but it's got a sort of old Mozambican Portuguese footprint which still lingers, and one of the hotels there is where the Mozambican cross-border bus drops people. And we interviewed a woman there who needed translation. She spoke absolutely no English. And then I said through the translator, well, how do you manage this without any language? And she said, I come to look and to feel. And I only need a few words, how much, etc. But also that the cross-border shopper is the eyes and the hands of the customer back home. And so they're coming here, there's enormous and sophisticated quality control going on. And it's all of those services, which are the services that happen in entrepreneurs, in Hong Kong, in Singapore, and they're happening here. Thousands of people, the collective energy of thousands of micro traders and micro shoppers, informal shoppers, but providing that service and at rapid speed.
But having heard about the kind of quantity of money being spent and the sort of desirability of the shopping precinct for many people, it's also very sobering to read in the book at what a hostile environment Johannesburg is for many of these people who come across the border, how they minimize their time in Johannesburg rather than maximize it. They'll come maybe for 2 days shopping and then back on the bus, another 40 hours back to Malawi or whatever. And at night they're locking themselves into their hotel rooms, they're sharing rooms with each other for safety. So there's that harshness of the lack of safety, the lack of lighting, the lack of convivial places to go in the evening. It's also just very sobering. And I wanted to sort of get onto that sort of darker side of the book, or the more sort of painful aspects. The book is filled with extraordinary stories, and some of them are humorous, some of them are just wonderful, of people's journeys across the continent, people coming from Ethiopia to Johannesburg, going back to Ethiopia. Very gripping sort of tales, but there are some very dark and difficult parts to the story of Jeppe. And I was quite shocked by some of them, particularly the levels of violence that people are experiencing. Tanya referred to that just now. For example, I was struck by the analogies used by some of the protagonists, the Ethiopians, and particularly this kind of terminology came out in the interviews Tanya did in Ethiopia. The words used like soldiers, the analogy of using a soldier going to war, Jeppy as a battlefield. And just to go back to that research that you mentioned in 2017, that included interviewing 300 plus retailers and 400 plus cross-border shoppers, Tanya writes, the numbers are staggering. Over 60% of retailers interviewed said they'd been physically attacked or assaulted in the inner city. Almost 40% regularly gifted police officers. For shoppers, the risk was also extreme, with a third having been exposed to violent crime in Johannesburg. And Tanya, I wondered if you could tell us something about what you witnessed around this, and particularly the brutality of the extortion rackets that are running in this area.
So, on a weekly basis, at least, there are police forces that close down the area. There are agents of brand IP companies that come in to police the counterfeit in the area. That's the sort of legal reason why they're in the area. In actual fact, what happens is that, yes, there will be somebody from brand lawyers or agents then who's there without the correct documentation. But there may be police forces from 5 different police forces may be in there, and police not just from Johannesburg but from Ekurhuleni, from wherever else are in the space. JMPD is in there. They're closing down shops. There's often violence. Brutal sort of attacking of shopkeepers, and the goods are taken, or goods may be taken. So people may go into a shop, take the goods, put them onto a truck, and go off. It's not often that traders know where those goods have gone, even though the law requires that the trader be present when the goods are, or can be present, allows the trader to be present when the goods are destroyed, which is what's supposed to happen. The story is that those goods are resold back into the area, and there are syndicates doing that. And I have seen police opening roller shutter doors where there's a veil which has got the customs police strapping over it. So it's obviously been removed, but previously. And that's sort of the regular policing that goes on. There are moments when there have been these massive raids which have hit the headlines. And there are a couple, 2013 and 2018 were big moments. 2013, the city took it upon themselves to close down all the street trading in the inner city. And they removed 6,000 street traders from the streets. And that wasn't only in Jeppe, but in Jeppe it was very violent, very big. And I was on the streets for a couple of those days. And so I was able to tell a story which you say, there's a mixture of this incredible darkness and this sort of humour. So I was on the streets, and there was the police, where there was shambox, and there were provincial police, and national police, and local police, and stun grenades, and bolt cutters, and it was absolute mayhem, and a huge number of different kinds of police vehicles. And I was sort of running around, thinking, who's done this? Who's this? Who can I phone? Who can I phone? And I suppose, taking on I had worked a lot for the city and a lot of senior officials, and this is probably what I also imagined myself, that I had some kind of authority. I phoned everybody up to the sort of sidekick of the city manager, and said, what's going on? And to a person, they said, it's not us, it's the mayor. Who's given this instruction?
Which mayor?
And you can look it up for 2013. We will send a book to DTI. And so there was. I then went over to a group of police and I said, who's given this instruction? And I'm Dr. Tanya Zack, and I've worked for the city of. He said, fuck off. And go fast if you don't want to be tear gassed. And then shot a canister, a tear gas canister. And I ran across the road with a whole crowd of people running across the road. And as we were running across the road, this man opened his jacket and said, do you want to buy some perfume?
That absolutely wonderfully captures, as Tanya says, the humour in the book as well as the dark side, and there are some extremely engaging and wonderful stories of people that spread their way throughout the book. Tanya, the subtitle of the book is Johannesburg as a port city. So no one apart from you has ever called Johannesburg a port. We know we don't have a river, we know we don't have a sea, we've got many delusions of grandeur, but we haven't quite stretched that far. And elsewhere in the book you use a term, enclave, that we get our master's students to think about, to try and figure out what this term means. Also referencing the idea of a trading post, a port, a hub of things coming in and being sent on elsewhere. And in terms of the scale of all of this, the sheer volumes of trade, you've given us a sense of it in rand terms, but you also say that Jeppy's role is nationally significant. So tell us about this notion of a port.
So I'm going to just do that quickly and maybe go back to the people, because I think I've talked quite a bit about it. Supported. It does the functions, the entrepreneur functions that Singapore and Hong Kong offer to goods coming from China and being repackaged and marketed and distributed across to many, many destinations. What we have here is goods coming from China, mostly fast fashion, that are being repackaged here. They are bought either directly or through the many Chinese malls we know on the west side of the city. They're repackaged here and they're moved to the far reaches of Southern Africa in ways and at speeds that corporates cannot get to. And this is small traders doing that. We've talked about the volume of the trade. The services are the same services. Of course, they're not as efficient as they could be. They're inadequate because of the lack of safety in the area. Because the policing is not directed at keeping people safe in the area. Because we're not thinking about this as a port. We're not putting customs clearance in the space where you could rather clear customs at the taxi ranks here. We're not thinking of it as a port, but it would be my call that if we could think of it, if we took it seriously, what would follow from that? And there were all kinds of conversations then around the economics, the spatial support, the other economies that can attach to this. But I wonder, because you said there were wonderful people in the book, it's not an economics book and a planning book. There are a lot of stories in the book about incredible people, and I had the luck and the privilege of meeting. So this area started in about the mid-1990s. Ethiopians were coming, the Derg had fallen in Ethiopia, the democracy in South Africa, and the first wave of Ethiopians came. People came here, they were selling belts and wallets at taxi ranks, and it still is the sort of entry point of sale and of how people make an livelihood in the space. But there were some wholesalers in town. So, and one or two Ethiopians sort of saw the opportunity to also start selling wholesale. And first sold wholesale on the streets, and then one opened a shop in what we would know as Medical Towers, but is now called Medical One in the space, and opened the first shop in that building. And I met the first 3 men who had become big mahas in this area, or in Ethiopia, but who opened the first shops in that space. And heard their stories, and their stories are in the book. But it was when I had finished the stories and interviewed them, and I was so pleased that I had found the first 3 guys, and somebody said to me, no one will tell you who the first person was who started here, because it was a woman. And then I had the opportunity of interviewing that woman and her extraordinary story, and how she was a pioneer as the first person to break open a shop onto the street front. And what that did, it made glass redundant in the space. There were all these shops that opened on, and they were big roller shutter door, because the first thing you want to learn in the space is how to display your goods in this hectic competition, and the second is to hide them, to be able to close fast in the case of a police raid. So those stories are also in there. There's some characters who you'll meet and you'll meet again. There's absolute heartbreak of people who, for me, I've sort of lost contact with. And there's stories of people I met in Ethiopia. And so I went to Ethiopia partly to see and understand where the people I was meeting came from. And also to get some sense of the return journey. Many young men and women, but particularly young men, it's the first sort of phase of migration, usually it's young men, have been in South Africa for 10, 15 years and have gone back because they've made good or because they haven't made good. And I wanted to get some sense of that. And so in Addis I met a group of men, amongst many others, but who are called the Joburg Boys. And what's interesting is in Joburg, and this is true for many migrants, you can't show your progress, your wealth, because of the competition and the surveillance within your own community, and of course because of Joburg's difficulties. And so the Joburg ostensibly a freer society than Addis, but people have to be a bit restrained here. And then in Addis, these people could be full flight to their Joburg selves, with their low-slung jeans and their buns, and their sunglasses, and their glass in their hand, and their sharp shoes. And you could recognize them, and people did recognize the Joburg boys in the streets. It was wonderful to meet them, and of course, because I met some, because people from here had told me about them, and then I took a group to our group, and we all sat together. Immediately, I was insignificant in the room. They were talking to each other in American, and I just heard Nando's, milkshake, Rosa, Cena. It was special.
So I'm a bit conscious of time, and conscious that some people have had to stand all the time. So maybe we'll make this the last question before we open up to the floor. So this is really about a question about the process of writing the book. Given all these different strands of work, professional commissioned work, being in the city of Johannesburg, your own research, your work with Mark, on other kinds of related inner city work. So how did you manage to pull together these very different strands of information? And I suppose the long arc of 15 years worth of work in the space. And perhaps I could just say that the book is divided into 4 parts, and it takes one through a very interesting sort of journey through those 4 parts. But how did you manage to work with all of this material and actually write this book?
So, a short answer, it was very difficult. And 10 years ago, I was given a fellowship at the Bellagio on the pretext that I was finishing the book. And at that stage, I thought, I've got these wonderful stories of people, and they each sort of represent something about Jeppy, and that's a book. But it wasn't. And in fact, the research that I undertook, the other research came only after that time. And the challenge, I first got it wrong before I got it as right as it is in the book. If it is, it's more correct than the book. But the challenge that I've tried to achieve in the book is to plait together these different strands of the analytical work, the wonderful personal stories, and my own story over that time. And I've tried to do that. I've had a lot of help from a lot of friends. Brian says, half the people come to the launch edit of the book. Thank you. And many people here gave me a huge amount of advice and help, and amazing Brenda Cooper in Cape Town. So a lot of it, but it is that attempt to plait the stories that feel more analytical and more human together.
Wonderful, and there are some very beautiful photographs in the book as well. Mark Lewis's photographs that just add to the incredible sense of the area. So, are there any questions or comments to put to Tanya? Oh, there's some hands going up already. I'm going to leave it up to you, Tanya, to field them. Thank you.
Tanya, you spoke about this huge industry. Well, one question that you might like is how much tax is paid and how is tax recouped from it? Because if you have a big industry, it's got to be taxed. Otherwise, it's meaningless to the country.
I don't know how much tax is paid in the area as in income tax. Some businesses are registered, some are not. Very early on, I sat with Dave Lewis. I asked these kind of questions, and Dave said to me, when it becomes in their interest to formalize, they will. And really, that is what's happening. A lot of the businesses are formalizing, are not selling counterfeit, bigger stores, are more registered. People wanting to invest in this country, wanting to marry, send their children to school, buy homes, have to become more formalized, more legal. As we make that more possible, I think we open up the opportunity for more of that. But let me say, when buildings are selling for 80 million rand in a city, where previously you couldn't sell it for 5.5 million, that's a lot of property tax going into the space as well. We shouldn't squeeze it back. There's some joke with the city council.
Question on your paper.
Sorry?
I just want to know the 10 billion that you spoke about. Where does that money go to? Does it go back to homeland? Do they invest it here? Because it's cash, I assume.
So, of course, many people are sending money home. Many migrants come here. If you come here as a single young man, your job is you're sending back money home, and there's a whole mystique about South Africa as the promised land, from where people, in fact, so these religious prophecies, people will go south and will make good and improve the livelihoods of people back home. And certainly there's a lot of that happening, but there's also a lot of investment here. So maybe quite unusually as a migrant community, Ethiopians are buying buildings in town, but not only Ethiopians, many migrants are certainly buying homes here and investing here. So it's both, and it is about it's kind of livable living in between two places.
Hi Tanya. So there's been a rise, obviously, since we all in 2008, this rampant rise in xenophobia. It's definitely taken a different turn in the last, I would say, 5 years. Project Dudula is really ramped up. I just want to hear, has this change in sort of the violence and xenophobia and almost the militarization. Has that affected residents differently? How are they responding to that? Yeah.
So thanks, Israel. There are a few stories in the book that do touch on that, and certainly xenophobia is a massive concern, and people are fearful. It's also leads to why people do, well, not leads to, but it's another layer for why it's important to sort of conglomerate in an enclave like this. So there's not a little Italy, Little Addis. I don't really like the term Little Addis because it sort of exoticises this space. But certainly it's a place of an entrepreneurial enclave. And to that extent, to some extent, people are protected by that. When an MP comes out of Jeppy Hostel to attack in the city, they're not likely to go through Jeppy because they will get pushed back. However, Ethiopians are physically recognizable, and it is known that they do business and do good business in the city. And so they are often targeted, much as Chinese migrants are targeted for the same reason, and targeted and I'm using the words, but sort of confronted by the police. And the police call them ATMs. So that's another layer of xenophobia.
Thank you. Tanya, just to say well done on this sort of endogenous marketing of our city. I think it's very encouraging.
Thank you.
And then my question is, have you got enough support for this book and this work from the city and the province and the state? And if not, why not?
When we first did our study in 2017, another and less favoured mayor, who is favoured by me certainly, Jeppe, said, this is so fantastic, these are exactly the kind of migrants I want in the city. Let's have a cross-border shopping plan for the city. And that plan, and they did put out a commission for that plan, and none of us has ever seen the plan. So no, there isn't enough support. We need all of us to be having this conversation wherever we are around this. It needs to be, in the business day, conversations being had in the city, in the DTI, etc. Yeah.
Sorry, I think that I'm mostly covered, but has there, in the period that you've been working on this, has the attitude of the city changed in any way towards Jeppy? Has it become more recognised as a source of work and wealth and whatever in the city, or is it still viewed as a precinct of chaos that you don't have anything to do with?
I mean, obviously the city is in its own turmoil, and and as we know, so whether its capacity to take on urban management or to be visioning a space anywhere in the city is quite difficult there. But I think that one of the sort of measures of whether the city is taken seriously is just the servicing of the space, the street level services, whether it's the paving or the stormwater drainage, which is absolutely shot in the space. And so what I'm happy about is that the term cross-border trade has become more familiar, people use it, and that's a good thing. But I haven't seen an economic plan that references that. We haven't got a cross-border shopping precinct, which I would hope that we have. But the city isn't one, it's not one centre, and if people leave and new people come in, one has to I think you want to keep saying it again and again to the new crowd. No, they haven't. Tell Parks Town. If you can take one last question and then we're going to wrap up because it's probably quite stuff in here. But one, I just wanted to say one more thing.
Greetings Mrs. Zack, greetings to Jacana Media and to all the others of Officer Protocol. I wanted to ask, through your experience, which product do you think is most profitable in the gym?
Can I answer that one?
Sarah's going to answer that.
Belts. The book repeatedly talks about belts, and it's just confounded me. I don't even think I own one belt, but people buy a lot of belts.
And I end up with a story. Tabat, will you allow me to tell the story that Ethiopians tell each other? There is a story which I heard in Addis, is that so there's this migrant comes back home. He's done his time in Johannesburg. He's been there for 15 years. He comes home, and every night he has these nightmares. And he's tossing and turning and tossing and turning, and belt. And the mother comes to the father and says, "What can we do? What can you do? We must wake him up. You know, he's having terrible nightmares. Belt." And the father says, "No, he's going to sell the belt now, and then he'll be able to sleep." Thank you, Mark Lewis, for the photos. Thank you so much. Thank you to Deresh from the Urban Works and Rachel Mensesalepe for the raps in the book, and to William Kentridge for the front cover. And then also, I'm so sad that Solomon Burhani is unwell today and wasn't able to be here. But you know, many of you have said to me, "Please take me to Jeppy." And I've said, "No, I can't, it interferes with my work." Solomon can take you. So if you want his number, and he wants to be a tour guide, he came to South Africa hoping to be a tour guide, ended up being my interpreter for 15 years. But if you ever want to go to Jeppy, there's nothing that I know in this book that Solomon doesn't know. And he's been extraordinary with me. But no way you can get a number for a tour guide. Okay.